This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. Led Zeppelin was the most influential pioneer of heavy metal music. As the band's lead singer, my guest Robert Plant almost invented heavy metal singing and has influenced countless performers. Page also wrote one of the most popular and parodied hard rock ballads, Stairway to Heaven. Led Zeppelin formed in 1968 and broke up in 1980. Last year, 35th anniversary Zeppelin DVD and CD collections were released. Now Plant has a new CD that collects some of the recordings he made before and after Zeppelin, showing the mix of blues, pop, and rock that he's performed over the years. It's called 66 to Timbuktu. The first recording on it was made in 1966. The last track is from a 2003 concert in Timbuktu, a festival in which he performed along with African musicians. There's also a CD of that concert called Festival in the Desert. Robert Plant, welcome to Fresh Air.
Thank you.
Let's start from one of the rarities from your new CD, 66 to Timbuktu. And I want to start with something that you recorded before Led Zeppelin was created. And this is You Better Run. This was a band, I think, that used to be called Texas Teens, and then when you joined it...
The Tennessee Teens.
The Tennessee Teens, excuse me. This is far away from where you are as Texas.
Exactly that, yeah.
And
I don't
then,
know why,
yeah.
I can't imagine why they chose a name like that, but the group was in existence before I came on the scene, and they'd been playing residencies in the clubs in Germany, rather like the Beatles were doing.
Uh-huh.
And I think everything American in those days in England was considered to be a sort of a good luck charm, you know, some kind of amulet. And so using a bit of Americana in the name was supposed to attract the people in the Midlands of England.
Was it partly an homage?
Happen.
Was it partly homage to Sun Records in Memphis?
No, not really. No, I don't think it was anything as bright as that, or as coherent as that. In fact, really, there was no lean towards rockabilly with that group. It was more or less a sort of a very white Catholic Motown covers band.
And speaking of covers band, you do a cover here of a Young Rascals song, You Better Run. It's just funny to think of you covering the Rascals.
Well, you know, the Rascals had a fantastic reputation amongst all musicians and still do. They're very, the quality of writing and the performance, fantastic vocals, and there was a great dynamism in their work. And, you know, when I first started singing that song, I was 16, and to try and get anywhere near the quality and the style of the Rascals in England at that time was virtually impossible. We just didn't have maybe the Italian stuff in the blood, or maybe just the street corner stuff that they'd come out of. The whole music culture in Britain was pretty weekend stuff for kids, you know.
What I find even more entertaining is that there's female backup singers on this and horns, which is just so different than what you became famous for with Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, I know. The day I actually walked into the studio in London, I had only been to London 3 or 4 times in my life at that point. I walked into the studio and I was absolutely blown away by the number of musicians. I think that the people who recorded me, who signed me to this recording, had got high hopes for me to become a new sort of parallel to Tom Jones. And so they threw everything in that they might have thrown in at that time just to make it work. And in different stages of my life, I've had a different overview or a different vision of those early recordings, especially track 2, which is even more out of character, I guess, with how people have come to know me. But in the very early days of a career, or whatever it was at the time, it was just amazing to be in the position at all. You know, to get loose in front of a microphone. I mean, I was very young and very shy.
Well, we'll get to that a little later. Okay.
I thought we might.
So this is Robert Plant from his new CD, 66 to Timbuktu, recorded in 1966. You'd Better Run, and by this time the band is no longer called the Tennessee Teens. They are now Listen.
Yours. Now I'm closing all the doors. What you trying to do to my heart? you trying to do to my soul? Every time I see your face, see you in another place. What you trying to do to my soul? Yeah. You better run, baby. You better hide, girl. You better leave me now, girl.
That's Robert Plant, recorded in 1966, featured on his new CD, 66 to Timbuktu. Your voice sounds really different on that than it sounded with Led Zeppelin. It's not as high. It's differently placed. It's different in nearly every way, I think.
Yeah, I think there was much more of a stated melody for that particular tune. The later work, or the work when I met up with Jimmy and we formed the band, the actual vocal presentation in Led Zeppelin was much more free form, and there wasn't such a need in many cases to stick to a rigid melody, whereas the Rascals track was very punctuated and very staccato, both in the musicality and in the vocal work. I think really that these exercises were really important for me, because I'd always been wailing in the bands that I'd been in with very little concern about melody after the first verse. So yeah, you're right, it is obviously lower register because it has to follow the melody, and also the key of the song was predicted by the arranger, and I guess, you know, with there being horns on it and stuff, it was probably in B flat or F or something like that, which is a good key for horns. And I think you get a little bit of Led Zeppelin vocal at the very end. Always the fade outs to records, the very end, as the cartridge, as the needle heads off into the great unknown. You always hear vocalists putting this great little bits and touches in. I used to be a huge fan of that. The vocalist finally gets is able to ad-lib and scat on the outros, rather like Dion used to do it. And a lot of the blues guys, they'd start talking and vamping with their voice. So there's a bit of it, a little bit of it.
Okay,
a bit of that stuff that was to come.
I guess we should hear the very ending of it now, so let's give that a listen.
Keep on walking, keep on walking. Gotta get away from you, 'cause I've got to leave you, girl.
That's Robert Plant before he was part of Led Zeppelin.